Good morning, everyone. We're going to start in a few minutes, so if you could get your snack and your drink and head for your seat, that would be wonderful. We're going to start in just a few minutes. Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
Jim, I'm on wireless 1, if you would turn that up just a little bit. Good morning and welcome to Holy Communion on this fourth Sunday of Easter. I'm so glad that we are together today. And we are marking the annual visit of our diocesan bishop, the Right Reverend Phoebe Rofe, who we were comparing calendars and is coming up on her fourth anniversary as the Bishop of West Tennessee later this week. And I can't believe it's been 4 years. Bishop and I, thank you, Bill. 4 particularly challenging years for the church, and it's been a really beautiful thing to see the bishop gather the clergy and keep us united, facing forward and moving through all of the challenges that have come our way. We are part of the wider Episcopal family, and the bishop is our representative of that, and I believe she's going to report on some of those things today, and then we'll take questions for what's on your hearts and minds. We do need to end a little bit early today so that the bishop can meet with the confirmands just before the 10:30 service. But Bishop, it is so good to have you with us. Welcome back to Holy Communion.
Thank you, Sandy. Good morning, everyone. So what I thought I might do is, this is my first time being with you since all of my many travels last summer. So I thought I would talk a little bit about things at the Anglican communion level, and then move to our sort of denominational level in this part of the communion, and then sort of end with a few things happening at the diocesan level, and then opening up for questions. So last summer, I was really privileged to represent this diocese at the Lambeth Conference. It's a conference that typically takes place about every 10 years, scheduled by the Archbishop of Canterbury, where it's a little complicated. The vast majority of Anglican and Episcopal bishops from throughout the world are invited to have 10 days of prayer together, Bible study together, fellowship, relationship building, and also talking about the issues that really affect all of us wherever we may find ourselves. So there are roughly 1,000 Anglican and Episcopal bishops throughout the world at this point, and 650 traveled to England last summer, along with about 500 spouses. So with staff and administrative support, there were about 1,400 of us there. We stayed in the dorms at the University of Kent, and we did most of our large worship services at Canterbury Cathedral. which is where worship has taken place for 1,400 years. So as an American, I feel really young when I'm in a space like of that age and thinking, yeah, we might have some churches that are 400 years old in the States, but not 1,400 years old. And then we did have one day at Lambeth Palace in England, which is in London, which is also where the Archbishop of Canterbury has a residence and offices. I will say that every time, except for 2022, there had always been tea with the Queen or the King at Buckingham Palace, because of course the Queen of England is both the head of the state and the head of the church. But given the large numbers of persons and the lingering impact of COVID and the Queen's health, we were not able to do that. But and then I think shortly after we got back, she died. Environmental care, creation care, was a primary theme of last summer's Lambeth Conference, because these extreme weather patterns, including drought, flooding, are not just taking place in the States, they're taking place everywhere. And this is causing massive dislocations of people having to move to places where they can find safe food and water, and sort of civil war in different parts of the world doing the same. And all of that has an impact on the church, and in some parts of the world more so than others. And so I spoke with a bishop from South Sudan who said, and this was last summer, the majority of my members and clergy are no longer in my country. They are in refugee camps in surrounding countries. So I spend very little time in South Sudan. I have to go where my people are. So I'm in refugee camps all the time. And having gone myself to Sudan and South Sudan in 2007 as part of a missionary trip, and seeing the coverage of what's happening in Khartoum, it's just very sad. It's heartbreaking. But when you're at that Anglican communion level now, we know bishops in Sudan. We know bishops in the Philippines. We know bishops in parts of India. So when we're seeing these news stories, it's not just some abstraction, right? Like, I know this gentleman from South Sudan and have been thinking and praying about, him. Like, I'm sure his situation is even worse now than it was last summer. Several of the bishops from different parts of Africa talked about the fact that none of their clergy receive a salary because the GDP is so low. People are so poor that people might bring extra grain or perhaps eggs or cloth that they've made, but the priests are also living at a subsistence level because there's so few resources to go around. So I was just struck by the fact that we minister in such different contexts. And I'm so grateful for all of the support that I have. Right? The diocese provides me with a wonderful salary. I have all the resources in terms of staff and office and technology to do my job. And other bishops are doing this job with only a fraction of the resources that we have available. So it was just a good reality check, I think, for me. So the pattern had been before this Lambeth Conference that it would happen every 10 years, but in between, there was really no regularly structured communication that the Anglican Communion Office would do to bring us together as bishops. And initially, this conference was supposed to take place in the summer of 2020. But then when COVID happened, they moved it to 2022. And so the Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, said, well, we've got 2 years that we're going to have to wait. Let's not just waste the time. If our office sets up Zoom calls to meet on a monthly basis, any bishop that wants to start having the conversation now before we gather in the summer of 2022, you can sign up. And so I signed up, and there were about 20 bishops on the call from so many different time zones. So there were bishops from North India, Malaysia, the Philippines, Ghana, Bahamas, Brazil, an indigenous bishop from Canada. So during our call, it was 7 a.m. Canada time, it was 9 a.m. our time, and the last one was 7 p.m. in India. So there was literally a 12-hour span from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., people being on this call. And so it was so wonderful to get to know people via the marvels of technology, so that when I got to Lambeth, I already knew bishops beyond just the folks in the United States. And so one of the things that came out of this year's Lambeth Conference is the Anglican Communion Office next month is going to launch sort of a phase 3, where they're going to try to find ways for us to gather via Zoom. And I'm not sure if it's going to be around specific topics that we're interested in covering, or whether it's going to be sort of just this random grouping like they did last time, and we'll talk about a number of different topics. But the Anglican Communion Office is trying to find ways to use technology to keep us connected in the 10 years between the time when we see one another face to face. And so I'm looking forward to hearing what that is, and it's fully my intention to sign up and participate, because those conversations are so helpful. Last summer, we also had General Convention, which is sort of our branch of the Anglican Communion's legislative gathering and sort of revival time. Normally it happens every 3 years. We were supposed to be in Baltimore in the summer of 2021. Because of COVID, that got pushed to last summer of 2022. And we did 5 days instead of the normal 10 to 12. And we had never shortened General Convention to something that brief. I think there have been calls over the years to see, can we do this work more efficiently? You know, if you think about a person who's thinking about running to be a deputy for General Convention from the diocese, like it's one thing for clergy. Clergy can get 2 weeks off to go to General Convention. That time doesn't count against their vacation or continuing education. But if you're running your own business, or you're working for a company and you only have, say, 3 weeks of vacation for the entire year, are you going to take 2 weeks of it to do this? Thinking about right, you're not. So that's why I think General Convention has tended to be older, because it's been more retired people, or quite frankly, people who have the resources to be able to miss 2 weeks of salary or whatever, and it didn't make a difference. So we did some work online, again, to prepare for General Convention, and we shortened it to 5 days, and we proved we can do it. So we're meeting again in 2024 to get us back on the normal cycle. And the biggest issue, I think, in 2024 will be the election of our next presiding bishop. So our presiding bishop is elected from among existing bishops, current bishops, for a 9-year term. That's very different from a diocese that elects a diocesan bishop, such as myself. We can serve in a full-time capacity until we turn 72. So that's how Bishop Johnson was able to be the bishop for 18 years. And in fact, when he retired in 2019, that was the year that he turned 72. So he sort of stayed in for the maximum amount of time that he could. But the presiding bishop serves for 9 years. And so I'm on the search committee for our next presiding bishop, along with Debbie Harmon Hines, who is the wife of John Edgar Freeman, the priest in charge at St. Anne's Millington. We're the only diocese, actually, with 2 members on that 20-member search committee. We have done the profile, which is sort of the job description based upon a lot of interviews with lay folks and clergy at the denominational level, including Bishop Curry and Bishop Jeffrey Shorey. We figured we might want to talk to the current person in the job and the person who had it before Bishop Curry to kind of see what are their thoughts about the gifts and the skills that the church might need in our next presiding bishop. It'll be released next month. We also did an online survey that was completed by about 6,000 persons from throughout our part of the Anglican Communion. And so we looked at the data, we listened to the persons who we interviewed, we prayed, we thought about what we're seeing in our own context. And so we've come up with the profile. Encourage you all to read it next month. It's done, but it's been sent out to be translated. So everything that we do, we translate into English and Spanish in recognition of the fact that there are English and Spanish speakers in our part of the communion, and we want to make sure that everybody can have access to this information. We'll include a link to the profile once it comes out in our weekly diocesan email that comes out every Wednesday. But then the bishops in the house who might be feeling a call to be the next presiding bishop can read the profile, and they will have, I think, a couple of months to then either get someone to nominate them or to be nominated themselves. And so it'll look like any other sort of search process. The committee will get all the paper applications, and we'll do an initial screening, and then we'll invite folks into a next round where there'll be sort of a background check and some more in-depth reference checking, and then there's a next round where we'll invite a smaller number to an in-person sort of discernment weekend where there's in-person questioning and conversation. And then after all of that, we hope to have a slate of 3 or 4 names that will be released probably by the end of April 2024. And that will give any persons who still feel a call, even if they didn't get selected through that process, they can be sort of nominated from the floor, as it were. But we still need enough time to do those background checks before General Convention next summer, where we'll do an election. And the way that works is the House of Bishops elects and the House of Deputies confirms. So that's a really exciting time. I was present when presiding Bishop Curry was elected, and it was just exciting to be present as part of that process. So I encourage you to not only review the profile when it comes out, but to kind of pray for us as we are figuring out who is going to be the best person to lead our church for the next 9 years. And then finally, I wanted to give a little bit of an update about what's happening at the diocesan level and then open it up for questions. One of the main things we're working on is a process for supporting our small congregations, as well as ways in which the diocese can support healthy clergy and healthy churches of all sizes. As a part of this work, we're examining the roles and the responsibilities of the various diocesan committees like Standing Committee and Bishop in Council, the role of the Commission on Ministry. And also, I think it's been a while since we've sort of looked at the diocesan office. You know, I've had 100% turnover in staff since I started, and to one extent, we sort of brought people in to fill a job description that was already present. And now we're at the point where we're saying, okay, what is it that we need people to do today? Sort of post-COVID, 2023, meeting the needs of the church as they are now. We might need to move some responsibilities around or reconfigure some things. So all of that is sort of a work in process. I don't think any of us really knows what the church is going to look like even 25 or 30 years from now, because things are changing so rapidly. But we're aware that we may need to make some adjustments to better serve where we are now. Another really pressing need is this issue of clergy. So we currently, of the 29 churches in our diocese, 11 are parishes, 18 are missions. And for the most part, that means they do not have a full-time clergy, because you're required to have a full-time clergy to be considered a parish, given the current definition in our diocesan canons. Of the 18 missions, probably 10 have either a half-time clergy or a person doing regular supply, like someone who's there the second and the fourth Sunday of every month. So that leaves 8 really without anybody. And there are not 8 clergy on our supply clergy list. There are probably only 3 or 4, because Memphis isn't necessarily a place that people choose to come to retire unless they already have a connection here. That's really different from when I lived in Richmond, Virginia. There were so many retired priests in Richmond. I mean, most congregations had 1 or 2 retired clergy just sitting in the pews. So whenever you needed to take vacation or go on sabbatical, you could easily find coverage. That isn't the case in West Tennessee. So we're trying to figure out, how do we strategically prepare and deploy clergy, knowing that some of these smaller churches will never be able to afford a full-time person. And even if you put 3 or 4 together, it would really be a challenge given just the cost. You know, last year in our diocesan budget, the minimum clergy compensation package was $90,000. That's salary, health insurance, continuing education, money for travel. So it's a lot to have a clergy person. So we are, after a 2-year hiatus during COVID, restarting our discernment process for ordination. So much of that work happens in small groups. The person meets with a lay committee for 6 to 8 months, and then the Commission on Ministry and the Standing Committee, all that small group work that's involved. Canon Sharon Alexander and I thought, during COVID, we're on so many Zoom calls as it is, we lose something when we're not in the room together. So we sort of did a timeout on the discernment process and said, let's get through COVID, and let's also think about some ways of revising that process. And so last summer, we had an introductory meeting to let anyone who was feeling a call to ordain ministry as deacon or priest come, and we were going to lay out this new process. And 15 people showed up, which was really amazing. So when I came in 2019, there were 6 persons in seminary, all of whom have graduated, 4 of whom are still in the diocese. You have one, wonderful Sarah, and also Amanda McGriff. Those were the 2 priests. Amanda is a full-time chaplain at La Bonheur and serves at St. George's Germantown 1 Sunday a month. And then there were 2 women who were priests who are in other dioceses. And then the 2 vocational deacons were Debbie McCandless, who serves St. John's, and Jessica Abel, who is not only the head chaplain at St. George's Independent School, but also serves at Grace St. Luke's 1 Sunday a month. So, you know, we haven't had anybody in seminary for the past few years. So we had 15 people show up to say, God is stirring up something in us. We want to learn more about the process. So we gave the overview, and following that, we said, if this really feels like something that's appropriate for your life right now, can you fill out an introductory form? And 10 people did. So then Jonathan Chesney, who is the chair of the Commission on Ministry, and Canon Sharon Alexander and I met early this year to say, all right, we have 10 people. You know, what's our bandwidth? You know, we want to be able to support people in this process. So how many lay discernment committees can we simultaneously manage? There are also budgetary implications because the diocese pays for certain things as part of the discernment process. Quite frankly, we had not budgeted having 10 people start discernment in 2023. So we had to look at the budgetary numbers. So like, what can we from a financial and just a human resources perspective handle? And we decided that we can handle 5. So there are 5 individuals who are moving forward. I will say that one of them is interested in being a vocational deacon. One of them feels called to traditional priesthood, which means this person thinks, I want to go to seminary, and when I graduate, I want to work full-time in the church, like Sarah or Sandy or Jonathan. 3 of them said, God is calling us to the priesthood, but we already have jobs that are very fulfilling. So we want to be bivocational priests. We're not going to quit our day job. That will be the source of our salary, of our health insurance and our benefits, but we will be available on Sundays to serve our smaller congregations that can't afford a full-time clergy person anyway. So we have 3 people, if we get through all the process, who will be doing a 2-year preparation for the priesthood that is low residency. It's offered through Sewanee School of Theology. They will do a week-long residency in January and a week-long residency in June. And other than that, their classes are all online. So if they start in the fall of 2024, they would graduate in the spring of 2026. The person who is thinking about full-time parish ministry, I will require to do the traditional 3-year residential in-person seminary training. And it's likely that they will do it at an Episcopal seminary, so they would have to leave the diocese. But for people who aren't going to get a full-time salary from the church, our thinking is we wouldn't ask them to quit their job for 3 years to study full-time to come back to a church that might only have $10,000 a year to pay them. So we're going to see how this goes. These individuals have a passion for our small congregations. I don't think I'm giving anything away by saying that they all come from one of our mission congregations. So they know it's their daily, weekly lived reality what it means to not have a regular clergy person. And so we're hopeful that this will be one way to try to address this issue of not having sufficient number of clergy to serve our congregations. And we're going to try it. Hopefully we'll learn from it. And then we still have the 5 individuals that we said, the answer is not no. The answer is just not yet. Sort of give us a year or 2 to get these 5 started, continue in the lay ministry that you're already engaged in your context, whether that's being a lay Eucharistic minister, whether it's running the feeding program, whether it's teaching catechesis of the Good Shepherd, whatever it is you're currently doing, keep doing it, and then we'll be in touch next year to kind of see, all right, is God still calling you? Do you still feel like you want to move forward? So that could be sort of another 5. We have not yet, because we told them not yet, we have not yet had an in-depth conversation with them about whether the calling is to the diaconate, the traditional priesthood, or the bivocational priesthood. So I just think increasingly there are going to be some new models that we're called to try to be faithful to our congregations based upon the realities of where we find ourselves today. So I want to conclude by just saying a big thank you for all of the members of Holy Communion who are so supportive of us at the diocesan level. As I mentioned, Jonathan Chesney is the chair of our Commission on Ministry. Sandy Webb is a member of Bishop and Council and our Insurance Advisory Task Force. Sarah Cowan is on the Standing Committee. Of course, Andy Cobb is our Diocesan Chancellor. Carter Webster Janice and Blair Evans, a couple of people are here, are on the strategic planning team for the diocese. So I truly appreciate the many ways in which Holy Communion parishioners are a part of this conversation about where our diocese is going. So with that, I think we've got, maybe 15 minutes for questions or any comments. If you've got any thoughts or any feedback, I'd welcome that as well.
I would love it if we could use the handheld microphone so our folks online can hear, and also just so everyone in the room can hear as well. Question or a comment for the bishop? When you wave, I head your way.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Just something that as a parent of two small people, we have noticed more low attendance in Sunday school. And are you seeing that around the diocese, around the country? And what are other churches doing to prevent that?
It's a great question. And I will say yes. In fact, I was meeting with a rector of another congregation last week who did mention that especially in the middle school and high school age range, they were seeing less people coming up and for in-person worship and Sunday school. My sense, sort of not being a parent, is that there's so many activities and kids are so busy, and even on Saturdays, that oftentimes Sunday is the one day maybe to kind of sleep in a little bit and kind of just exhale and not be so scheduled. So if that's the reality that parents are facing, I think it's probably going to involve a conversation with parents, especially if it's for the little ones. See, they can't drive themselves. So it's really going to have to be the parents or the grandparents to get them to these different things, to maybe ask what schedule works best. And perhaps it isn't Sunday morning, right? Maybe that's one of the changes that we may have to make. Like for me, of course, I grew up, it was always Sunday mornings, but I'm realizing that coming up in the 1970s, we weren't so heavily programmed. So getting us up on Sunday mornings wasn't as big of a deal. But I think it's figuring out what's going to work for the parents.
Bishop, I have a question that was delivered online via our chat.
Hi, online.
And the question is related, so I'll let you just piggyback off that. The question is, how does the diocese support children's ministry, or how do you think the church at large should support children's ministry?
Yeah.
Children and youth.
Yeah. So, quite frankly, the diocese isn't doing a lot if you're talking about sort of younger children. The diocese would get involved at the level of happening, and also through the programs offered Mud Camp and other camping activities at St. Columba, the ski trip that takes place for the middle school and the high school kids. So middle school and up, there are several diocesan things happening. For the younger kids, we really aren't. And that is an area where I think, as part of our larger conversation about how do we support healthy congregations and healthy clergy, are there things that can happen at the diocesan level for the youngest kids? I have seen congregations with the resources really have two paid staff persons, one just dealing with the younger kids, and then another person dealing with middle school and high school, leading those activities, given the different developmental needs of kids. But as you might imagine, if you're in a small church in a rural area, there may only be 2 or 3 kids, and there's not even a full-time priest. There's no full-time staff. So then what does that look like? The DYC, the Diocesan Youth Council, which I think was in existence maybe about 10 years ago and sort of was in hiatus, and we've just inaugurated that. they're trying to plan events. Unfortunately, for our surrounding counties, their focus is Shelby County, but they're trying to plan events so that if you are in Bartlett, for example, and you're at St. Philip, and there are not enough kids to do a whole youth group, but this group is doing something once a month or every other month, you can join that larger group. Where the rubber hits the road, though, is really in the rural areas. And so perhaps that might look like, if you're in Somerville or Brownsville, and if there's one Presbyterian church and one Lutheran church and one Methodist church and one Episcopal church, perhaps those congregations can come together for some joint youth activities. But I think sort of partnerships and collaboration will probably be more and more a feature of what it looks like to be church, and not so much strictly denominational. Like, I grew up going to EYC, which was the Episcopal Young Church Men, when I was a girl in the 70s. And there were so many kids that our EYC was full. Now, today, there are two churches in Pine Bluff, both of which had full-time priests when I was a girl. Neither of them can afford a full-time priest today. And even if you put the youth from both of those churches together, you still wouldn't have enough. So I think we're going to have to start crossing denominational lines to make this thing work.
Other questions or comments for the bishop?
Do you see the number of missions over time growing?
I think it depends on the mission. There are a couple of our missions that are doing wonderfully well. The difficulty is if you're so there are 21 counties in West Tennessee. Our diocese covers 21 counties. Some of those counties have actually had significant decline in overall population over the past 20 to 30 years. So if you're in a county that's lost a third to half of the population, there are just fewer people around in general, let alone fewer Episcopalians. So in that situation, Robert, I don't know what the solution is going to be. But there are several of our mission churches that are growing. So it's not dependent so much on the size, it's more dependent upon the community that they find themselves in.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm worried about the bishop in Sudan. Does he get to go to Lambeth, and does he get financial support from the church? And the other thing is, does ERD come into play for any of them?
Yeah, so when I went to Lambeth last year, the fee for, and I'm going to use this in air quotes and you'll know what I mean, first world bishops, so North America, Canada, parts of Europe, was $6,500 to stay in a dorm room at a university with a twin bed and no air conditioning and dorm food. It didn't cost $6,500 for 2 weeks for me to do that. They built in a cushion. There's no way that bishops from Sudan, Burundi, the Congo, probably the Philippines, ever could have come if we hadn't subsidized it. And that's what it means to be family, right? So this diocese paid $6,500, not just for me to travel, but so other people could be there to be part of the conversation. So that's the first thing. In terms of sort of the ongoing support, I know that both ERD and the Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, are well aware of what's happening, not only in Sudan, but in other parts of the world as well. And I think there are, when the country, if you have a situation like South Sudan, and also the horrible situation in Haiti, which is part of our fold, where there's so much political instability, there's not a lot that we can do in that moment, but it's more when things have settled down just a little bit, because there's no infrastructure, so you can't wire money, they can't cash checks. Like, so right now, there's not a lot that we can do in addition to pray. But my understanding is that when things are stable enough that it is safe to either send people or to get resources in, we will.
Other questions for the bishop or comments?
Oh, you have one in the back, Sandy.
You're being so discreet with your hand.
This is a little closer to home, and I don't know quite how to ask it, but down by the cathedral, I was working waffle shop, and of course I parked, and thank you very much for allowing us to park in y'all's parking lot. It seemed like there was a lot of people that were kind of milling around, but they weren't like doing anything. Like they weren't going to a church, to the chapel doors and I was wondering between the church and Constance Abbey, a couple streets down, how that ministry was evolving or changing or.
Yeah. So the question, if you didn't hear her, is sort of, I guess I'll just say, security concerns in the neighborhood of the cathedral. I can say that security concerns are definitely a higher item on my agenda today than they were in 2019 when I first came. We are within walking distance of 201 Poplar, which is part of the reason why Constance Abbey started and why the cathedral, St. Mary's Cathedral, has also had this history of outreach and feeding in that neighborhood. But something happened with COVID. You can imagine the stresses that we felt in our beautiful homes with plenty to eat, being able to, pay to have groceries delivered if we were nervous about going out. If you were already on the streets or on the margins, COVID was devastating. And so we have noticed that the men who, the homeless community in that area has gotten a little more aggressive with women. And so security concerns are a concern. Because we have the major renovation project happening at the cathedral, there are lots of construction workers and they're mostly men. So I think that actually has been helpful for the female staff who work for the diocesan office. We're primarily female staff. And sometimes persons who are suffering from mental illness, who may be using illegal drugs to self-medicate, may not always approach us in what we might consider to be the most Christian fashion. So I think that is a real issue. Constance Abbey is in a time of real transition. As you all may be aware, Roger Walcott, Roger and Marjorie were the founders. He had a very significant bicycle accident when he was in California that subsequently led to his death. And so I think their board is really in discernment about, can the ministry continue in its current format? If it's going to be revised, what is that going to look like? How will it be funded? Roger and Marjorie basically lived there. That was their life. They didn't get a salary. But if you're going to bring someone else in to manage it, in all likelihood, that person will want to have a salary, may not want to live there, may already have a house. So I think that ministry is in transition. And given all of the construction work at the cathedral, they have suspended their feeding ministry until we get through this season. They used to do a Wednesday morning breakfast, a Saturday morning pop-up, and a Sunday morning breakfast and worship. All of that has been temporarily suspended until we sort of get through get through the renovations and then figure out what new policies, procedures, protocols do we need to have in place to make sure it's not only safe for the people who are coming, we want them to have a safe environment, but also safe for the volunteers. And I'm going to go ahead and, give his name. He may not want me to, but your own Andy Pouncey is the parish administrator for St. Mary's Cathedral. And so I think that Andy would be a great resource if you have more specific questions about what's happening at St. Mary's Cathedral. Andy, I hope that's okay that I put you on the spot. And so I'm not sure that we want to do it now, but if people have questions moving forward, they can talk to Andy.
Well, right. Bishop, we're going to need to wrap up in just a minute, but could you just give the headline? I don't know that a lot of folks know even about the construction work at St. Mary's, or that there's a new dean in place there, and then we'll need to wrap in just a minute.
Yeah. So when I came in 2019 and, had my installation in the cathedral, and I looked up and manna from heaven was falling down. The cathedral has needed to address some deferred maintenance in terms of roofing issues, which impacted the wood in the bell tower, which has impacted the plaster in the ceiling. And so they started in January a pretty significant renovation project with Linkus as our primary contractor. Again, Andy is a great person to go to with the specifics, to do exactly that, to replace all the wood in the bell tower, to replace the repairs to the roof, to prevent moisture from coming in, to redo the plaster, and then to think about maybe some HVAC things to keep the level of humidity in the main nave at a level where we won't have these issues moving forward. That project should be finished in 2 months, maybe, Andy? In about 2 months. As part of that, they have taken out the entire pipe organ. Those pipes are being refurbished so that when they're installed, they will be up to date. And in September, for the Feast of St. Mary's on that Saturday, which I believe is September the 9th, they want to have a big service open to the entire diocese to welcome everybody back to see the updated cathedral. They had an interim dean, the Reverend Jean Vargo, who was there for 2 years. She relocated to Ohio to take another call in the fall. And so in February of this year, the Reverend Gary Mead has come on board as their interim dean. Gary was the rector of St. Mary's in Dyersburg for 15 years. So he's now at the cathedral, overseeing this renovation project and really asking them to think about what is their mission and ministry today. They have wonderful history with Constance and her companions, and I think the very courageous stance of Dean Dimmick in 1968, and all of that is well and good. And yet in 2023, are there new areas, given changes in the neighborhood or different things that they now see that they want to live into as a community of faith? So I think it's an exciting time for them. I think they feel really good that this renovation project has started. They seem to be encouraged by Gary's leadership. And so I'm really hopeful about them in this season and what the future looks like. So Sandy, thank you for that reminder. Yeah.
Bishop, thank you so much for being with us and for being open to this forum. It's just such a delight to have you back at Holy Communion.
Thank you.
You will forgive me, but I need to keep us on a schedule for the next few minutes, something that's, kind of personality on brand. I would love for the people who are being confirmed or received to head over to Quilling Chapel, where I'll bring the bishop. And you might notice that we have a beautiful array of tables and flowers and things. So those who would like to greet the bishop after church, please plan to come back here and spread the word that coffee hour and the bishop's reception is in this room today rather than in the Vaughn Welcome Center. Church starts in about 25 minutes.